Okay, great. All right, well, again, I want to thank everyone for being here today, and great discussion. Really appreciate the interactions, appreciate the lunch conversations there, and this will be the last session, but please always feel free to send me an email. Also, feel free to check the Apologetics Press website. There's a lot of good articles, a lot of good materials there as well. And so what I thought we'd talk about, and again, any of these topics, as you may have noticed, you could easily spend a full day on. And so it really just depends on what the level of detail that's needed when we're evangelizing. And so, there'll be some people, they can just, depending on who they work with, co-workers and friends and acquaintances, this might never really come up. There might be just other topics that are of more importance, that's again most useful in evangelism. But other people, depending on again who they work with, acquaintances, friends, it could be a very important topic. And so this is one, origin and age of the universe. We'll get as far as we can, but again, going to try to get through the kind of the regular material, 45, 50 minutes or so, and then make sure we have time for any kind of questions and answers. And please, when we're doing the discussion, and kind of like this morning and last night, please feel free to just bring up any point at all that's of interest. Last thing, again, want someone leaving today saying, oh boy, I really wish we talked about this more. So, because I'm, again, happy to stay as long as anyone like. Have, I think it's like 642 slides in backup, and so we could go through no, I might, but we won't. Yeah, so, okay. So anyway, topic this afternoon is going to be origin and age of the universe. Again, one of the, I guess you'd say one of the verses we've been referring to on this particular subject with Christian evidences is 1 Peter 5, 8 through 9. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him steadfast in the faith. Hopefully interesting or kind of wow, that's neat. Just try to picture yourself in 1907. Okay, and we just came out of Christmas season, New Year's, and of course at the end of the year there's always what were the biggest stories of the year, and you have like who's the person of the year and who's this. So it's always like what's the biggest story of the year? Well, 1907, coming up on about 115 years ago. In 1907, Wall Street Journal reported the most extraordinary event of the past 12 months was the proof afforded by astronomical observations that conscious, intelligent human life exists upon the planet Mars. Okay, now this is proof, and it's the Wall Street Journal, and you're like, I gotta say, I'd have to agree. I mean, wow, that's pretty big, right? And so, and of course, totally wrong, but 1907, but just think, okay, what would you do if you're a Christian, you've been encouraging someone to study the Bible, encouraging them to put their faith in the Bible, and they come in and they plunk a Wall Street Journal down in front of you and say, well, how's this consistent with the Bible? Well, the temptation, of course, is to immediately go with the kind of the false premise they've put down. In other words, okay, wow, it's the Wall Street Journal, very credible. They've got proof by astronomical observation. So, wow, how do I reconcile that with the Bible? How do I fold that into the Bible somehow? That's the temptation. That's not the right thing to do, but that would be the temptation. You want to try to respond. And so, that situation like that, the correct response would be, to me, it's like, wow, I hadn't heard that before. Let me look into it a little bit and get back. Let's talk about it more later this week or something. And then really take it seriously, really pursue it, because that person, the fact they did that means that they might be in danger of being led astray, or it might be hindering their ability to even consider the Bible. So that's something. If someone ever did that, we'd want to be very diligent about following up. Okay, so that's, and so it almost gets even worse. Okay, it's like, well, how could a Christian disagree with this scientific proof? So you had Percival Lowell, Harvard University graduate, so he's got academic credentials. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, very wealthy, so he's a very successful individual. He actually sent a well-equipped team of engineers and astronomers to the Atacama Desert. It's one of the best places to do astronomy, to observe canals. Now, this would be the first sort of red flag. Nothing you could really use it for, but didn't say, I'm giving you this great telescope, you're going to this great observing spot, look at Mars, tell me what you see. Their assignment was to observe the canals on Mars. Okay, so they're already supposed to look at the canals on Mars, which is, again, kind of like what we were talking about this morning. It's like, well, show how this bone, turned into shows this creature turned into that creature. You've got kind of presupposing the conclusion. French Academy of Science and others are convinced that Martian civilization was an established fact. And again, in some academic circles, even then, evolution was considered true. Life is expected to be common throughout the solar system and the universe. So you're up against a lot when you're talking to us, if that situation happened. So you start saying, okay, where could we go with this? Well, if God created men on Mars, would be one option. Maybe God created men there. Well, then why did Jesus come to Earth to die if God also created men on Mars? If the men on Mars didn't need a savior, then why are they going to be destroyed with the rest of the universe? Okay, so that's, you can see how that would, going that way would open a whole can of worms. Why didn't God tell us that he'd created men on Mars? That'd be kind of important. That would open up a whole can of worms. So then you say, well, what if people had traveled to Mars and settled there? And that's like I think the Martian Chronicles, of course, that was the premise for that. Well, it was a fake premise. I mean, so there's movies out there about that, not in 1907, of course, but then you start thinking, okay, well, if they traveled after the flood, why don't we have evidence that they had developed that much technology? And if they had traveled before the flood, then does that mean that we can use our intellect to escape God's judgment? And so again, can of worms. I should mention this is totally tangential, but before the flood, you had 1,656 years with people that had better brains because they were closer to the original perfect creation. So again, better brains, all spoke the same language, and all lived really long. And so you always do wonder, what kind of technology did they have before the flood? But that aside, if somehow they had gotten the technology to go to Mars, and that also opens up a lot of a very just scriptural, kind of can of worms. And so this was 1907, and it literally took probably 50 or 60 years before people gave up on that idea. And so again, just this big splash, humans on Mars, proof afforded by scientific observation, really through the 50s. If you go back, you look at, this was a picture of a Collier's magazine from the 50s. Is there life on Mars? There's some, Walt Disney was really fascinated about, aliens and life and stuff. So you go back, some of these are still out there on YouTube. They have these videos and they say, well, the question still remains, will we find people on Mars or just things like, rabbits and chickens? And, that was the only option, and of course, well, now you have a lander or an orbiter in 1965. Wow, there's nothing there. You have a lander, Viking lander. Wow, there's nothing there. And now we have a helicopter flying around on Mars, and wow, there's nothing there. And so, we're picking up sound. So people are still they're trying to cling to the idea that, well, maybe a bacteria just made itself on Mars. But that goes back to the discussions we were having earlier that, it's not, it adds a mystique. Bacteria can't make itself on Earth. It's not going to make itself on Mars either. So that's kind of where we're at now. But just think of over that 115 years, just the potential damage that could have been done. And we just, again, just always remember the Bible is God's inerrant word, and biblical contradictions with fake science are always resolved by advances in true science. But it takes a while because there were probably people that were the age of a lot of us in this room that never saw this get fully resolved. They heard 1907 there was men walking around on Mars, and even in 1950, still people were still kicking that idea around. So then you move forward, and something that might be a little more applied. To me, this is exciting because a lot of us, we grew up with this idea that, there's got to be civilizations all over the place. There's got to be, universe, if evolution was true, it's being pushed, and there'd be, still this idea that there would be, advanced aliens, or however we want to phrase it, all over the universe. So this just came out, coming up on 4 years ago. This was Oxford University, June of 2018. And what they're basically saying is, they're basically admitting they were wrong. 1950, I think that's when Enrico Fermi, he just had this famous quote. He says, "Where are they?" Okay, and apparently it was at lunch with some other physicists. Of course, what he meant was, hey, if you believe in evolution, if we believe that there should just be aliens all over the place. And they had some pretty reasonable technology then. It's like, why weren't we getting any evidence of that? Why weren't we seeing anything? So that was, people refer to that as the Fermi Paradox. And so what they've finally done is the evidence, we've done so many observations, we've looked so hard, they basically had to come back to say, they won't say they were wrong, but they said, we adjusted our parameters, and we're probably alone. And that is a huge admission, again, from from atheists, because we're not, there's supposed to be evolution is supposed to happen just like that. 30 years ago, we're getting literally people high up saying things like, well, where there's water, there's life, and so all we got to do is find water and there'll be life there. And all that's just been completely completely proven wrong. So I'll just read these quotes. This says, when we take account of realistic uncertainty, replacing point estimates by probability distributions that reflect current scientific understanding, we find no reason to be highly confident that the galaxy or observable universe contains other civilizations, and thus no longer find our observations in conflict with our prior probabilities. So again, a theory is supposed to have a predictive capability. Their predictive capability was going to be that, there should be life all over the place, and found nothing. Okay, so rather than saying we were wrong, they just say, we just adjusted some things, so there really wasn't this conflict. We found qualitatively similar results through two different methods, using the author's assessments of current scientific knowledge bearing on key parameters and using the divergent estimates of these parameters in the astrobiology literature as a proxy. So again, just, they did a lot of technical sounding stuff. Then it says, final quote is, when we update this prior in light of the Fermi observation, we find a substantial probability that we are alone in our galaxy, and perhaps even in our observable universe. So again, they're saying their range goes up to 99 points, and these are atheists that supposedly believe life should be everywhere because evolution works and evolution is inevitable. 99.6% chance that we're alone in the galaxy, 100 billion stars, and then 39 to 85% that we're alone in the universe. So where are they? Probably extremely far away and quite possibly beyond the cosmological horizon and forever unreachable. So think of where we've gone from hey, we've got proof from scientific observation, astronomical observation, that there's humans on Mars. You go from that, true science advances, that's ignorance, right? That was the proof based on ignorance. True science advances 115 years later, now they're even saying, hey, better than even chances. And these are the people, again, that are promoting this, that we're alone in the observable universe. So again, it's encouraging, but if you, it's just, again, something, if it's useful, it's a way to possibly evangelize. But it's encouraging, but it's not, that doesn't mean just because there's things like this that provide some encouragement, that's not necessarily, again, going to cause people to abandon a lot of these false religions. So we need to turn people back to the truth. James 5:19 through 20. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. So going on then, creation of the universe, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament show his handiwork. But again, we all get to choose where we put our faith. So one of the, I guess you'd say, one of the prevalent theories now, and I know there's all kinds of them popping up, but you go back to this idea of the Big Bang, and so it's basically, though, just kind of one of many, billions of years theories. And I know now things are getting really strange. I know several people in this audience, and there's others too, they even talk about, well, we were just living in a simulation. They completely dodged the question altogether about where did we come from, which, again, really strange. But if you go back and look at the Big Bang, well, we started knowing there were problems with these types of theories really in the 30s. And by the mid-70s, the evidence against the theories was so significant and began to be publicized that we had to come up with some kind of an explanation. And what was happening was the observations, that scientific, true science observations we were making, were in conflict with what the theory would predict. And so we had our observations, we had what the theory would predict, and so there was this conflict between the two. And so to resolve that, we started making up fudge factors. Just kind of these, I don't know how else to describe it, just things we were making up to try to resolve this conflict between what we would observe and what the theory would predict. And so two of the more well-known ones are dark matter and dark energy. Of course, we had to invoke inflation, that came along a bit later. So all these little fudge factors. And when they first came in the mid-70s, it had to be 50% of the universe had to be made up. So in other words, 50% of the universe had to be dark matter and dark energy, but these are just, again, it's made up parameters. And so I remember, I was always interested in space again, so I actually remember there was a lot of, almost like an uproar, saying, you can't do that. You know, you can't have this theory where you're making up half the universe. And the response was, oh, no. Yeah, we got to make up half of the universe now, but that's just to kind of set the framework for our theory. And once we get more data, we'll be able to get rid of that. We'll be able to get rid of those fudge factors. Okay, well, as expected, it went the opposite direction. So in the mid-70s, had to make up 50% of the universe. Now, to make the Big Bang work, we have to make up 96% of the universe. Okay, so just let that sink in. I've got this theory that's supposedly going to tell me about the origin of the universe, but 96% of the universe has to be made up. In other words, it has to be these kind of entities that have these certain properties that I can't observe. I can't observe the entities. I just have to know they're there to support the theory. 96% of the universe has to be made up. This is from Scientific American. It's actually remarkably open, some of the quotes here. It says, it has been noted that the names dark matter and dark energy serve mainly as expressions of our ignorance, much as the marking of early maps with terra incognito, meaning just we don't know. And then this last sentence, I really like it. It says, dark energy considered even stranger. The only thing we know about dark energy is its name. And so what they're really saying is, we just made this up, and that's exactly what they did. We put dark matter and dark energy pretty much everywhere now whenever there's a conflict. This was University of California Observatory's look, and again, I'll give them credit for the way they phrased some of this. It says our universe may have suddenly inflated from a tiny point during the Big Bang. Most websites would just say it did. And you're supposed to believe it because it's. And so it's, so again, it will gather a lot of data, and there'll be a Herculean attempt to spin that data in a way to say that somehow that, that supports this atheistic theory or that atheistic theory, but the data will still be there, and that data will be things that, again, if we're willing to be objective and use true science, it can be data that would actually help us and really actually understand the universe and its workings. And so that was kind of one of the questions, but I'll read it more carefully at the end here. So where we're at right now with dark matter and dark energy can be distributed throughout the universe in any fashion desired. Dark matter and dark energy can have any property desired. If they talk about dark flow and dark light and inflation, and if anybody ever figures out what dark light might be, let me know. I mean, it's, so they have just all these different factors. And so the point is that similar approach could be used to support virtually any theory imaginable. And so Joey told me that you guys really like math. Really like, he tries to work them into all his sermons. And so I was like, okay. So I was trying to think, okay, how am I going to do this? So, but I came up with one. Okay, so there's a little bit of algebra after lunch. Great time to do it on a Saturday. And so the situation we're in here is you have our observations. That's the true science. And then we have these fudge factors: dark matter, dark energy, dark flow, dark light, inflation. And then you claim that that means support for a theory. And so the analogy is, if I had the equation, if x, in this case it'd be the observations, plus y, in this case it'd be the fudge factors, equals 100, what does x equal? Okay, so it's after lunch on a Saturday, so don't do algebra, just someone give me a number for x. 50, you're so absolutely right. X is 50, y is 50, the answer is 100. Anybody else? 30, you are so absolutely right. X is 30, y is 70, the answer is 100. And so yeah, this is one of the easier math challenges you'll ever have. Okay, so now if, say though I come back next year and I say, hey, got some bad news. I know last year I told you the answer was 100. Yeah, the answer is really 200. Great news, you're both still right. X is 50, y is 150, X is 30, y is 170. So you're, and so the whole point is, if we're allowed to make up 96% of the universe, it totally doesn't matter what the observations are or what the theory is, we can pretend any set of observations support any theory we want. And so when people talk about the Big Bang, that's the situation we're in right now, is we're having to make up the universe. And so, but boy, you got internet, you go, I mean, it's just like, oh, Big Bang's an established fact, and it's just like, it's not even a scientific theory. Anything constructed like this doesn't qualify as science. It has no predictive power. What basically happens is whenever we find something that contradicts the Big Bang, we just add another fudge factor in. That's not a predictive power. That just means we have this theory that continually needs to be adjusted. And so Christians aren't the only ones that have noticed this. This was written all the way back in 2004 as an open letter to the scientific community. It's published in New Scientist, but it's available online. And it was basically hundreds of professors, PhDs in astronomy, national lab employees, hundreds of people signed this. And they were basically pointing out that exact fact. They say the Big Bang today relies on a growing number of hypothetical entities, things that we have never observed. Inflation, dark matter, and dark energy are the most prominent examples. Without them, there would be a fatal contradiction between the observations made by astronomers and the predictions of the Big Bang theory. Okay, fatal contradiction. Again, fatal contradiction between the observations made by astronomers and the predictions of the Big Bang theory. In no other field of physics would this continual recourse to new hypothetical objects be accepted as a way of bridging the gap between theory and observation. It would at the least raise very serious questions about the validity of the underlying theory. Goes on and says, what is more, the Big Bang theory can boast of no quantitative predictions that have subsequently been validated by observation. The successes claimed by the theory's supporters consist of its ability to retrospectively fit observations with a steadily increasing array of adjustable parameters. Okay, so what they're saying is, again, you get an observation, it contradicts the theory, but no problem. We can solve it with a little bit of dark matter, a little bit of dark energy. There's just a way we can resolve that. So that's not a scientific theory. And then I like this last quote, because it says, just as the old Earth-centered cosmology of Ptolemy needed layer upon layer of epicycles. And so, of course, Ptolemy came up with the idea that everything revolved around the Earth. And we started to get true science. And again, that was ignorance. Okay, we started getting true science. From our observations, we say, no, everything doesn't revolve around the Earth. And we knew that was wrong. But rather than saying, okay, I guess my theory was wrong, he started adding in what he called epicycles. And so he started basically just adding in these fudge factors. And so they're saying we're doing the same thing with the Big Bang now. And so I thought that was pretty harsh. Again, these aren't Christians. These are just scientists speaking as scientists. And so but again, it's not, one of the reasons they wrote that letter is because the existing paradigm is, the Big Bang. It's very hard for them to get any kind of research money or any kind of support at all for looking at alternatives. And a lot of their alternatives probably weren't biblically consistent either, but they couldn't get any funding at all because, again, that was the existing paradigm. It's kind of, again, goes back to like what we were talking about in the fossils, how fossils are interpreted, some other things. So this is interesting, just because, 73% of the universe has to be dark energy for the Big Bang to work. 73, 74, depends on who you talk to. Well, this is back 2009, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and it said, basically, they figured out a way to get rid of the need for dark energy. And in a nutshell, what it came down to is if the Earth was in a special location, and in this case, it literally would be at the center of the universe, then you get rid of the need for dark energy. And so it's not so much where that location is, just the fact that it's a special location is what caused people to reject it. And so if you read the last sentence there, it says, however, the only problem is for the equations to work, we must be literally at the center of the universe, says physicist Lawrence Krauss of Arizona State University in Tempe. It doesn't seem physically relevant. So the Bible doesn't tell us where God put the Earth, but it's certainly not biblically inconsistent to think he put us at the center of the universe. He did send his son to die on the cross here. He did create Adam and Eve here. He did. So it's not, certainly not biblically inconsistent to say we're at the center of the universe. But just think what they're saying here. They're saying, hey, we get rid of dark energy. We get rid of this huge fudge factor that, like as was saying, the only thing we know about it is its name. But we can't even consider that because If we were to consider that, for that to work, we have to be at a special location. Well, why couldn't we be at a special location? To me, that's a win-win. You say, hey, not only do we just figure out how to get rid of dark energy, but we also know where we are in the universe. And that's going to help us with our understanding of physics, understanding of the universe. Can't pursue that because if we're at a special location, any special location, that in their minds implies the existence of God. In other words, that's too strong of evidence for God if we're in any special location whatsoever. And so this was mathematicians. Physicists came up with the same thing. If Earth and its environs are centered in a vast billion light year long bubble relative to surrounding distance, so again, basically saying we're at the center. It says the article goes on to note, but that scenario violates the Copernican Principle, a notion near and dear to the hearts of physicists and cosmologists, including Caldwell and Stebbins. And what the Copernican Principle, again, basically says is we're not allowed to be in any place specific. Everything has to be random. And again, this goes back to the nomenclature. Remember we talked about microevolution is the opposite of macroevolution. But it's slicked on the nomenclature. Well, Copernican Principle, everybody thinks, oh wow, that must be a scientific principle. It's purely religious. It has absolutely nothing to do with science. The idea is just that we have to be someplace random, and so they're not even willing to consider it. So this could literally be Nobel Prize winning. Hey, we got rid of dark energy. We don't need to make up that 73% of the universe. They still have to make up dark matter, but we don't have to make up that 70. But instead, it's like, it can't be relevant because it basically violates atheism. In other words, it would imply that there might be a God because we're in a special location. So that's where, when you talk about how these false religions are holding us back, technically, this to me is a good example. I mentioned briefly last night, every now and then Christians get accused of holding back science. But if you look at it, the opposite is true. When you look at arguments for vestigial organs, well, that actually kept us from studying organs and structures in the body. It took us 103 years, I think it was, to more than that, 108 years. Anyway, to figure out important functions, the important functions of all of these organs and structures that people, in the late 1800s were trying to claim were vestigial. Well, part of that was because why would somebody study an organ or structure that they were told was completely useless? And so that held back true science. And so I think it was, 1895 when Wiedersheim published these 180 vestigial organ structures. It wasn't until 2003 until we found the important function of the last remaining one was the appendix. And we figured out a lot of important functions for the appendix, especially when we're very young. And so the junk DNA, that whole argument, again, is based on atheists were pushing it. It held back science because why would people investigate DNA sections that they thought was junk? Well, obviously by that time I think they were still coming off the vestigial organs, so a lot of people didn't take that seriously. They realized no, there's no such thing as junk DNA. I think it was about 2012 when that whole idea was put to bed. When you had it was like I think it's 32 organizations had 30 simultaneous publications about all of the uses for DNA that we just didn't fully understand yet. Well, here's another one, because we're trying to understand the universe. We're trying to understand some just fundamental physics, how things work. You have this very obvious avenue to pursue, but because it, in the minds of the atheists, would go against atheism, you're not allowed to look at it. And so again, it's false religions holding society back from that. And this is just a physical understanding of the universe standpoint. So you get a lot of questions that people ask, but a lot of them have some very biblically consistent explanations. One is, how can we see light from stars that are millions of light years away? So that would be a case if the Earth was located near the center of the universe, which again the physicists and the mathematicians say if we put the Earth there, you get rid of the need for dark energy. So that's actually pretty powerful physical evidence. Then from general relativity, and we measure this experimentally, and it's one of the things Einstein predicted. We know that gravity affects time. Where something is in a gravity well affects time. During creation week, literally zero Earth time could have equated to vast ages in a time frame far away from Earth. And so there's one physicist in particular, Russ Humphreys, wrote a book, Starlight and Time. He also has a recent video out, Light Years No Problem. You have to watch it about 5 times because it's got a lot of content packed into a video. But anyway, so anyway, that's avenue that he's pursuing. But then you have what could stretch out the heavens imply. I think it's 17 times in the Bible talk about God stretching out the heavens. Isaiah 40:22, Job 9:8 are examples of that. Well, what could that imply? How could that affect things? And so some people are pursuing that avenue. What if God chose to make parts of creation mature? We talked about that some last night. I mean, we know trees were becoming full grown in a day. Adam and Eve were born full grown. So you have so parts of creation mature. Well, that could have an effect. What if there were accelerated processes during creation? That could have an effect. And then of course we have new discoveries also. So there's lots of biblically consistent explanations that could explain these questions or answer these questions. But again, they're not even allowed to pursue them. And so it'd be almost like, I wonder if in the year 1900, a brilliant anatomist had said, hey, I want to study the appendix. And his professors or colleagues would say, you're crazy. It's a useless evolutionary leftover. Why would you say that? So again, it took 108 years. And so again, it's like how long will we let science be held back by, again, clinging to atheism? So I don't know. It's a question. And then, of course, false assumptions are often taught as fact. If you go out, not picking on Wikipedia, but one of the Wikipedia sites written by a very anti-Christian person, and he'll say, I think it's, we know the age of the universe, and it's 13.728 billion years old or something like that. So he pretends that we know the age of the universe to 5 significant digits, which was really interesting because the question was asked, and that's one of the things people are using to promote the James Webb is, we'll get to really know the age of the universe. But some people say, oh no, we already know 5 significant digits. Well, same day, just for fun, I decided to look, had this article come out and said, well, see if that article's still out there. Sure enough is. If you disagreed with his 5 significant digits on the age of the universe, you're obviously ignorant and everything, everything else. But it said, this from AP, it says, universe is looking younger every day, it seems. New calculations suggest the universe could be a couple billion years younger than scientists now estimate, and even younger than suggested by 2 other calculations published this year that trimmed hundreds of millions of years from the age of the cosmos. The huge swings in scientists' estimates, even this new calculation could be off by billions of years, reflect different approaches to the tricky problem of figuring out the universe's real age. And so, nothing wrong with that quote. Nothing wrong with people saying, well, if I use this assumption, I get these ages. If I use these assumptions, I get these ages. But coming back around, how many people do you know that have had their faith challenged by this belief in the Big Bang or this belief in the universe and everything in it just making itself? And unfortunately, a lot of people have. I mean, that's how what they're exposed to almost nonstop if they think about it. And so that's just, again, so I guess the point on this side is to point out to people that why would we let something as weak as the Big Bang, that essentially isn't even a scientific theory, why would they let that affect our faith in the Bible? And so but it does. I mean, you hate to admit it, but it really does or can affect people's faith. So science needs to be allowed to pursue the truth. One question, of course, is what was there before the alleged Big Bang? Well, all explanations are metaphysical. We talked about a little bit last night. You can say, well, maybe there's this multiverse generator out there that's just generating all of these universes. Okay, well, that's appeal outside of nature, outside the universe, is appeal of the supernatural. Or maybe there is this point of infinite density where the laws of nature don't apply. Well, again, laws of nature don't apply. That's an appeal to the supernatural. Again, so we're looking at things that are supernatural. So even just this whole idea that there's this atheistic theory out there that explains everything, just fundamentally, it always appeals to a false God. And so we're talking about now it's the, we're all living in a simulation. Okay, well, who made the simulation? It's kind of like the aliens question. It just sounds fancier. Who made the aliens? Who made the simulator? Who's doing the simulation? Or there's this universe generator out there that's just spit out infinite number of universes. Okay, what made the universe generate? It's just, and so don't want to go too far down those rabbit trails because they'll just change. Every couple, 3 years, they'll have a new one. And so just somehow need to, if someone is struggling with this, just go back and say, the Bible doesn't change. The Bible is consistent. The Bible explains all this better than the atheistic theories do. And again, possibly use that along that particular, I guess, say just line of reasoning. And so this is the Boltzmann Brains. It's another implication of the Big Bang Theory. And this is one I actually, when someone first mentioned this to me, I was like, nah. People aren't going to really believe that. But then I think to me, we all live in a simulation is even stranger. So I no longer have to recalibrate my my strangeness sensor or whatever. But so this is called Boltzmann Brains, and so the idea behind Boltzmann Brains is, okay, if a universe that's as finely tuned as our universe could be created, then it's actually much, much, much more likely, I think they even go as far as saying infinitely more likely, that just a standalone brain will be created. Okay, so you kind of see where this one's starting to go. So if a universe that's as finely tuned as ours could just spontaneously come into existence, it's much more likely that just a brain would pop into existence. And so what that means, and I'll read the quote here in a minute, but what that means is that from my perspective, you guys aren't really here. Okay, I'm just a brain that's popped into existence, and the way the atoms in that brain happen to be configured, because again, we don't have a soul, we don't have free will, we don't have a spirit, so it's just the atoms and the quantum states of those atoms in my brain that are making me think all this. Well, they're just configured in a way that I just think you're here, and I think I had a great drive out here, and I think I, grew up, I had a childhood, I think I have a house, that's all just how my brain happened to pop into existence. And oh, by the way, everything's just lasting a tiny, tiny fraction of a second, because then my brain's going to disappear back into the chaos. So that's literally what Boltzmann Brains means. But this is seriously entertaining. People call it the Boltzmann Brain problem. They try to get funding to research the Boltzmann Brain problem. But again, the main point is just the length that people will go to try to deny God, deny the Bible, the length that just how absurd people are willing to get to, just to accomplish that. So I'll read the quote. It says, if our current level of organization, having many self-aware entities, is a result of a random fluctuation, at least they say if, because it wasn't, obviously the universe wasn't the result of a random fluctuation, but it does say is a result of a random fluctuation, is much less likely than a level of organization which only creates standalone self-aware entities, meaning creates brains. For every universe with the level of organization we see, there should be an enormous number of lone Boltzmann brains floating around in unorganized environments. In an infinite universe, the number of self-aware brains that spontaneously and randomly form out of the chaos, complete with memories of a life like ours, should vastly outnumber the brains evolved from an inconceivably rare local fluctuation the size of the observable universe. So that's just a fancy way of them telling me that you guys aren't really here. Okay? All right. So again, keep the goal in mind, Ephesians 4:14 through 15. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. With speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ. And again, just always be prepared to then go ahead. If we get someone willing to objectively consider the Bible, be prepared. Okay, how should we? What's our next step? What would be some good areas to study with them? Lots and lots of options, and this is just one example. So any questions on what we just covered just now, or anything we talked about this seminar, or anything really anything at all related to this subject that people would like to discuss this afternoon? So have again as much time as anyone's interested in. And there is opportunity again with the sheets of paper. If anyone has any questions they wanted to write out, that would be great also.
So this Boltzmann's thing is we're just living in a matrix?
Yeah, it's hard to. I think the first one. Okay, so you're probably right. It's I think ego. So I think it's all Marvel movies are great, but I think literally that's I think ego and Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was probably a Boltzmann brain. But I have to go rewatch that scene a little bit more. Okay, so you guys probably have better examples.
Fiction.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of the foundation for this theory, where it came from. So that probably wasn't it. It was probably before then. Yeah, exactly. So.
Can we test our politicians with Boltzmann brains?
Yeah. I know a lot of times you wish they really didn't exist, but yeah.
Mike, at dinner last night, you started talking about, Joey, you talked about the fact you at one point were an atheist, and you started studying and started understanding, and you came to an understanding there was something better than atheism. You mentioned to us at dinner last night you would explore different mechanisms as far as secular religion and things of that nature. What brought you to the truth of the New Testament? I mean, obviously you were searching for something, but there was some trigger that said, "Oh, this is right."
Right.
So the study was good. But what was the mechanism that brought you to that?
Okay. So once realized that basically evolution couldn't work, and that was I think I mentioned that turning point to me is a lot of, basically God put a lot of Bible believers in my life. I don't know how else to phrase it. And so lots and lots and lots of discussions, but it was one night I was talking to my roommate in college. It was my senior year of undergrad, and we had some back and forth. We talked about all kinds of things, and one of the things I really admired him. He was really smart. He was a top mechanical engineering student. He wouldn't compromise. I think I mentioned to some of you I had this whole article ready to talk to him about that had basically a compromise position on the flood. I was like, well, maybe it was just a local flood, Mesopotamian flood. Maybe that's why all 200 cultures, all the cultures around the world talk about a flood. And he just said, no, the Bible says it was global. Kind of shut that one down right away, which was good, because if he said, oh, okay, then I would have started thinking, well, he doesn't really believe the Bible. So that was kind of the relationship I had with him. And I want to stress that it's really getting to know people. And but what he did is he showed me it was a paragraph written by a philosophy professor at another university. And what that philosophy professor was trying to do is to say no one should be allowed to get a science or engineering degree from that university unless they'd signed that paragraph. So I read the paragraph, and it's basically a profession of faith in evolution and the Big Bang. You have profession of faith in evolution, or just atheism, I guess. And but he was trying to get his university to adopt a stance that if they won't sign this paragraph, they shouldn't be allowed to get a science or engineering degree. So I read the paragraph, and I'm like, well, yeah, we all know this is true. What's the big deal? Just sign the paragraph. And but then it dawned on me, here's my roommate, top mechanical engineering student. He wouldn't sign it, okay? I mean, I knew he wouldn't sign it. We didn't go too much further with it. So then I started thinking, well, why does a philosophy professor have the right, or think he has the right, to keep my roommate? A philosophy professor might have never taken a science or engineering class in his life. Why does he think he has the right to keep my roommate from being able to get an engineering degree, especially when my roommate's really good at engineering? And so then it kind of started clicking. Hey, this isn't, it's just a false religion. There's nothing to do with science. And so you start looking into it, and it just collapses right away. So that got me softened up. In other words, I guess just the general idea that the universe and everything in it just made itself, that just collapses. I don't know how else to describe it scientifically. So then you start exploring. Well, you turn on the radio, and a lot of times there'll be like, so you try to find a Christian station, you hear a Christian station. A lot of times you'll hear a talk. And a lot of the talks, they refer to the Bible a lot. It seems like they're referring to the Bible in context. But then right at the end, it's always like, okay, so if you want to become a Christian, you need to say this prayer. And after you've said this prayer, send us a note telling us you said this prayer. And so the first time you hear that, it's like, well, okay, so that's how you become a Christian. But then you turn in the next day, and it's a different prayer. And you turn in the next day, and it's a different prayer. Okay, so you start thinking, okay, what's this about? And then, of course, at some point you figure out, well, that prayer is nowhere in the Bible. And that's why I like this slide. Nowhere in the Bible is there an example of someone, just saying like, I guess they call it the sinner's prayer, to become a Christian. And so then you start looking at different just groups, and you go around, and my wife and I were going through the process kind of the same. She started out from a little bit of a different background, but we're going through this process together. And so a lot of times we'd end up, it'd basically be saying, well, what do you guys think about this? And they'd always tell us, well, here's what we think, here's the creed, here's this. And a lot of them you can spot right away, like, wow, that doesn't seem right, or that's off. But other ones, a lot of times I would say the groups are probably, basically talking about denominations, but a lot of them, they're probably 80, 90% right. But that 10 or 20%, boy, it does a lot of damage, and it's not biblical. And so finally, when we visited the church, we kind of had the same thing. Well, what do you guys think about this? And I just remember one of the elders, their answer was, well, it doesn't matter what we think, let's see what the Bible says. And then we started reading the Bible, and of course it makes sense. But even just initially, just this whole idea, it's not like us having to go to all these different denominations and say who seemed smarter, or who had the best, which one. It's just finally, that was literally the first time anybody had ever said that to us. So as members of the church, you start thinking, oh, everybody does that. No, our experience was nobody does that. Only the church would say something like, doesn't matter what we think, let's see what the Bible says, let's study the Bible. And so we were both baptized about 6 weeks later, I think, after studying. So that was kind of the process. So a few things from that. One is we really need to be out in the I'll say out in the community, but that's also just one-on-one, just really, basically, it's almost like making people so they're not afraid to come to church with us. And I know that sounds really strange, but if you'll probably notice this. Some people, you'll ask them, and it's like they're polite, you're friends with them, but they'll come up with the weirdest excuses for why they can't come to church. And so, yeah, but don't take it personally. It's just they got something in their background that says, don't even think about going inside a Church of Christ. Okay, so we got to overcome that. And so that's just one-on-one relationship. Every friend we know, every family member, just really encourage them. However that takes is very personality dependent. To me, it's just the one that hit us was just, hey, let's just see what the Bible says. Really simple and really biblical. But just how to approach that. That's important. Doing things like anytime we, and again, this is opinion, but helping someone's children, helping their family, really makes them less suspicious of us. And it's a strange way to phrase it, but people are suspicious these days. And so they're wondering what kind of group are we getting involved with. Well, if you guys, I know there's a lot of the church is very active in disaster relief, or in, some congregations do Mother's Morning Out, they do VBSs, but just something to, hey, we're normal people. We just want to talk to you about the Bible, we're concerned about your soul, or we want to talk to you about your eternity, or talk about, or we want to study together, just whatever approach works best. So that's, I think, also very, very important for someone becoming a Christian. Because the other danger is people will get a certain point and then they'll stop. In other words, they'll get comfortable. They'll just get to a group that's kind of makes them feel good. They get some good social interactions, but it's almost like they're getting inoculated against Christianity. So they finally find a group of people that don't swear as much or drink as much as a lot of the other people, and they don't sleep in on Sunday morning. That was kind of a joke, but that was, a lot of people, that's their view of Christians. Oh yeah, you guys are the people that get up Sunday mornings. That makes you a Christian. So it's so just all of those factors, I guess, come into play. Really important. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, my roommate, if he'd been a D student, would know I'd have been just like, but he's very Christian, but it's whatever we do, work at it with all our hearts. It's amazing if someone's doing that, how much of an influence we can have, and so thanks. Other questions or comments? Ouch. Yeah, you just smiling. Yeah, oh yeah, I got you. We'll defer that one. So so a lot of other topics we could cover. I think we touched a little bit on radiometric dating last night, but that's one. And again, the key is it's all based on the assumptions. What we actually measure with radiometric dating is just like, say, ratios of isotopes and things like that. And so that'd be a more detailed conversation. But it's, again, in a nutshell, if we make biblically consistent assumptions, then the dates we obtain from things like radiometric dating, they are biblically consistent. If we assume the Bible's wrong, and in particular, if we assume there wasn't a recent creation, we assume there wasn't a flood, and we apply those assumptions, then radiometric dating can show the Bible's wrong. And so, but that's circular reasoning. You're basically saying, basically having to say, I've assumed the Bible's wrong, and then I'm using, based on those assumptions, I use radiometric dating to prove the Bible's wrong. That's again a longer discussion. Yeah, exactly. Or it's kind of like, we know the Earth can't be near the center of the universe, even though, wow, that gets rid of the whole need for dark energy. But we just know it can't be there. It's like, well, how do you know that? When especially actually all the evidence is saying that's where that's powerful evidence that that's where it is if you get rid of this need for dark energy, but not even allowed to pursue that. They could pursue it and say, well, no, we got this other evidence to say it's not. They're not even allowed to pursue it, though. All right, well, oh, yeah. I'll go for it. Yeah.
Sure it's true, but I've had people tell me that even the vaccines that are given to children today either are used, aborted fetal cells are used to test them or are in them. Is that true?
So my understanding is, that some of the early, basically the fetal cell lines that they used for testing things, they were from aborted babies. And so as far as in the current ones, I don't think there would, there's certainly no recent cells in those. But so I think what a lot of states have done, and maybe not states, but just, you're now allowed, we're allowed, when we're on our driver's license, we're allowed to be an organ donor, right? And so I think they're allowing a mother to say that if, for some reason, if they have a miscarriage or just their baby, passes away, which unfortunately happens, that their baby can be an organ donor. And so I think, to me, that's that hopefully will prevent that issue in the future. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of like, if someone gets, killed in a car wreck, and then there's people will sometimes mention, but they were an organ donor, and, now someone else is having a better life because they donated their kidneys, and they donated. And so I think that's being, babies or unborn babies are now allowed to be organ donors.
There's not fetal parts in the vaccine.
No, it's just for the development. That's my understanding. And now the other one is, you could think of, so I think that to me it's sad to talk about, but that is the way to prevent that in the future. So you're not killing somebody to try to develop a vaccine, just like you're not killing someone to harvest their kidneys, but you're saying if that person happens to die, then they can, then they can donate their kidneys. So that's important. It's subtle, but it's important. Now there could be, every now and then you'll hear that there's people that are actually trying to develop a market for aborted babies. And so, and unfortunately people do all kinds of evil things, and so it wouldn't surprise me if there are a few people out there doing that, but that's not what would be happening here either. So
It's okay for a Christian to have vaccines?
yeah, that's, do more research, but that would be the way I'm, I think, that's the way that people are, that's kind of the history was. I think they were, it was actually, I think, back in the Netherlands in the 1970s, I think, was when it was almost like it was right after Roe v. Wade, and it just, but again, it's hard, you're reading something that's 50 years ago, but it was almost like, it sounded like they were trying to spin it in a way that, oh, see, this is a good thing, and it's, but it wasn't babies from the U.S., but yeah, to me, the path forward now, at least there is a path forward, if that's even necessary, because that's the other one is, was that even necessary? Because what if someone, just go back to World War II, Adolf Hitler did all kinds of horrific things to the Jews, but you can't say that anything he did was necessary. He can claim, I learned a lot from this, right? Or the Nazis could claim they were learning a lot, or they were doing a lot, but you can't make the direct connection that was required for something to occur in the future. It was a good, yeah.
Well, every culture has their own, I mean, you have the atheist and you have somebody who believes in God, but every culture also has its own way to get to God.
Okay, right.
Typically. Would you use, I mean, if you were working with somebody who was from across the world with their God, their version of God, I mean, I know there's a lot of scientific foreknowledge in the Bible.
Right.
Aside, I mean, either that or any other words of wisdom for, like, if somebody doesn't have a problem believing in God.
Right.
I mean, we live in a very multicultural world.
Uh-huh.
What would be your first step, I guess, with directing them to the God of the Bible versus whatever God they...
Okay. Yeah, so again, very person dependent. To me, one of the ones is there's a lot of philosophies in the world, but most of them don't answer the fundamental questions. And so, like, you can have a philosophy of reincarnation, and then if you're good in this life, you'll come back as something better. If you're bad in this life, you'll come back as something worse, But it doesn't answer the fundamental question. And so you almost start saying, so you can almost say, hey, and this is where you have to be careful about how much do we, don't want to be unnecessarily confrontational, but we also don't want to give someone false comfort. And so, but in that situation, you say, yeah, that's great that your philosophy says we should be good in this life, and then define good, but then also point out that doesn't, it's not really a religion because it doesn't explain where the universe came from. Okay, and so then if you look at I think most philosophies that people adhere to, it doesn't answer that question. You look at and so you come down to, okay, you have basically Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the three that maybe answer the fundamental question, and they all go back to the Genesis account. And so they at least answer, where the universe came from. And so then it's both the scientific foreknowledge and then the prophecies, and the prophecies about Christ. And so probably one of the ones that at least gets people thinking, because they'll have to think about it, is people. I can't remember who first made this observation. It might have been C.S. Lewis, but it could have been other people later. But people aren't willing to die for something they know is false. So in other words, people can be deceived into killing themselves, for something that they were deceived into believing they needed to kill themselves for. But if they know it's false, in other words, and so the application there is if the disciples, the apostles, were all basically willing to die for Christ. And so, but the apostles would have had to be intricately involved in any kind of hoax surrounding him being resurrected, and so the fact that, so they would have known, in other words, they wouldn't have been deceived, they would have had to be part of it. And so just the thought that, okay, would you really be willing to die for something that you personally were part of faking? And so that gets a lot of people thinking. So that's something that's unique about the Bible. But then, of course, the prophecies fulfilled by Christ, and then with Islam, it's just kind of just looking at the history of it, when it occurred, where it occurred, how it was said to occur, no corroboration, and then most of it is interesting, a lot of the most successful cults in general, they're like 95% Bible, and then the 5% that they decide to add or subtract. And so that you get a lot of that too. Well, the Bible's true, but we also believe in polygamy, or the Bible's true, and we also believe in, that maybe, somehow different races, some were cursed and some aren't. So they just add something to it, and so that's, and they also keep updating their, whatever they're publishing. So you get some of that, but that's, it depends on where the person's coming from, but just. And then, but the key is, faith comes from hearing by the word of Christ. So get them to the point where they're willing to objectively consider the Bible, and then get them into a Bible study as quickly as possible. Great question. I wish, again, I think I mentioned that last night. I wish I had like the 10-point, you do this and they're guaranteed to,